in which growing maturity rekindles the relationship between one pair of lovers, and self-absorption carries another pair to the brink of death. Chapter 5. The waiting room of the famous Petersburg lawyer was full when Alexey Alexandrovitch entered it. 3 ladies, an old one, a young one, and a merchant's wife, and 3 gentlemen, one a German banker with a signet ring on his finger, another a merchant with a beard, and the third an irate official in uniform with a decoration around his neck, had obviously been waiting for a long time already. 2 assistants were writing at their desks, their pens scratching. The writing implements, of which Alexey Alexandrovitch was a connoisseur, were exceptionally good. Alexey Alexandrovitch could not help noticing it. One of the assistants, without getting up, narrowed his eyes and addressed Alexey Alexandrovitch gruffly. "What would you like?" "I have business with the lawyer." "The lawyer's occupied," the assistant said sternly, pointing out with his pen at the waiting people, and went on writing. "Could he not find time?" "He has no free time. He's always occupied. Kindly wait." "Then I shall trouble you to give him my card," Alexey Alexandrovitch said with dignity, seeing the necessity of abandoning his incognito. The assistant took the card and, evidently disapproving of its content, went through the door. Alexey Alexandrovitch sympathized with open courts in principle, but he did not entirely sympathize with certain details of their application in our country, owing to higher official attitudes which were known to him, and he condemned them in so far as he could condemn anything rarefied in the highest places. His whole life had been spent in administrative activity, and therefore, whenever he did not sympathize with anything, his lack of sympathy was softened by recognition of the inevitability of mistakes and the possibility of correcting them in each case. In the new court institutions he did not approve of the circumstances in which the legal profession had been placed, but till now he had never dealt with lawyers, and his disapproval had been merely theoretical, while now it was increased by the unpleasant impressions he received in the lawyer's waiting room. "He'll come at once," the assistant said, and indeed 2 minutes later the long figure of an old jurist, who had been consulting with the lawyer, appeared in the doorway, along with the lawyer himself. The lawyer was a short, stocky, bald-headed man with a reddish-black beard, light and bushy eyebrows, and a prominent forehead. He was dressed up like a bridegroom, from his tie and double watch chain to his patent leather boots. He had an intelligent, peasant-like face, but his outfit was foppish and in bad taste. "Kindly come in," said the lawyer, addressing Alexey Alexandrovitch, and gloomily allowing Karenina to pass, he closed the door. "If you please." He indicated an armchair by the paper-laden desk, and himself sat down in the presiding seat, rubbing his small, stubby-fingered hands overgrown with white hairs, and inclining his head to one side. But he had no sooner settled in this position than a moth flew over the desk. With a dexterity one would not have expected of him, the lawyer spread his arms, caught the moth, and resumed his former position. "Before I begin talking about my case," Alexey Alexandrovitch said, his eyes following in surprise the lawyer's movement, "I must observe that the matter I have to discuss with you must remain Secret. A barely noticeable smile parted the lawyer's drooping reddish mustaches. I would not be a lawyer if I was unable to keep the secrets confided to me. But if you would like some assurance. Alexei Alexandrovitch glanced at his face and saw that his gray, intelligent eyes were laughing and seemed to know everything already. You know my name? Alexei Alexandrovitch continued. I know you, and you are useful. He caught another moth. Activity, as every Russian does, the lawyer said with a bow. Alexei Alexandrovitch drew a breath, gathering his courage. But once resolved, he now went on in his squeaky voice, without timidity, without faltering, and emphasizing certain words. I have the misfortune, Alexei Alexandrovitch began, of being a deceived husband, and I wish to break relations with my wife legally, that is, to be divorced, but in such a way that my son does not stay with his mother. The lawyer's gray eyes tried not to laugh, but they leapt with irrepressible joy, and Alexei Alexandrovitch could see that it was not only the joy of a man who was receiving a profitable commission. Here there was triumph and delight. There was a gleam that resembled the sinister gleam he had seen in his wife's eyes. You desire my assistance in carrying through the divorce? Yes, precisely, said Alexei Alexandrovitch. But I must warn you that I risk abusing your attention. I have come only to ask your advice in a preliminary way. I desire the divorce, but I give importance to the forms in which it is possible. It is very likely that if the forms do not fit my requirements, I will renounce a formal suit. Oh, that's always so, said the lawyer, and it is always in your power. The lawyer dropped his eyes to Alexei Alexandrovitch's feet, sensing that his look of irrepressible joy might offend his client. He saw a moth flying just in front of his nose, and his hand jumped, but he did not catch it out of respect for Alexei Alexandrovitch's position. Although our statutes on this subject are known to me in general terms, Alexei Alexandrovitch continued, I would like to know the forms in which cases of this sort are most often carried through in practice. Your wish, replied the lawyer, not raising his eyes, and adopting, not without pleasure, the tone of his client's speech, that I lay out for you the ways in which the fulfillment of your desire is possible. And at an affirming nod of Alexei Alexandrovitch's head, he continued, only giving a fleeting glance now and then at Alexei Alexandrovitch's face, which was covered with red blotches. Divorce, according to our laws, he said with a slight tinge of disapproval of our laws, is possible, as you know, in the following cases. Let them wait, he said to the assistant who had thrust himself into the door, but nevertheless got up, said a few words, and sat down again. In the following cases, physical defects in the spouses, or a 5-year absence without communication, he said, bending down his stubby, hair-covered fingers, or adultery, he pronounced this word with visible pleasure. The subdivisions are the following. He continued to bend down his fat fingers, though cases and subdivisions obviously could not be classified together. Physical defects in husband or wife, and adultery of the husband or wife. As he had run out of fingers, he unbent them all and went on. This is the theoretical view, but I suppose that you have done me the honor of appealing to me in order to find out about the practical application, and therefore, going by precedent, I must inform you that all cases of divorce come down to the following. If there are no physical defects, I take it. No 5-year absence either. Alexei Alexandrovitch inclined his head affirmatively. Come down to the following. Adultery by one of the spouses, and exposure of the guilty party by mutual agreement, or, lacking such agreement, by involuntary exposure. I must say that the latter case rarely occurs in practice, the lawyer said, glancing fleetingly at Alexei Alexandrovitch, fell silent like a seller of pistols who, having described the advantages of each of 2 weapons, waits for his purchaser's choice. But Alexei Alexandrovitch was silent, and therefore the lawyer went on. The most usual, simple, and sensible thing, I consider, is adultery by mutual consent. I would not have allowed myself to put it that way if I were talking with an undeveloped man, said the lawyer, but I suppose we understand each other. Alexei Alexandrovitch was so upset, however, that he did not understand at once the sensibleness of adultery by mutual consent, and his eyes expressed bewilderment. But the lawyer immediately came to his assistance. People cannot go on living together. There's a fact, and if they both agree in that, the details and formalities become a matter of indifference, and at the same time this is the simplest and surest method. Now Alexei Alexandrovitch fully understood, but he had religious requirements that prevented him from accepting this measure. "That is out of the question in the present case," he said. "Only one case is possible: involuntary exposure, confirmed by letters which I have in my possession." At the mention of letters, the lawyer pursed his lips and produced a high-pitched sound of pity and contempt. "Kindly consider," he began. "Cases of this sort are decided, as you know, by the religious departments. The Reverend Fathers are great lovers of the minutest details," he said with a smile that showed his sympathy with the Reverend Father's tastes. "Letters undoubtedly could give partial confirmation, but the evidence must be obtained directly, that is, by witnesses. And in general, if you do me the honor of granting me your trust, you should leave to me the choice of measures to be employed. He who wants results must allow for the means." "If so," Alexei Alexandrovitch began, and suddenly turned pale. But at that moment the lawyer got up and went to the door to speak with the assistant, who had interrupted again. "Tell her we don't give discounts," he said, and went back to Alexei Alexandrovitch. While returning to his place, he inconspicuously caught another moth. "Fine upholstery I'll have by summer," he thought, frowning. "And so you were kindly saying?" he said. "I shall inform you of my decision in writing," said Alexei Alexandrovitch, getting up and taking hold of the desk. After standing silently for a while, he said, "I may thus conclude from your words that the carrying through of a divorce is possible. I should also like you to inform me of your terms." "Everything is possible, if you allow me complete freedom of action," the lawyer said without answering the question. "When may I expect to hear from you?" he asked, moving towards the door, his eyes and his patent leather boots shining. "In a week. And kindly give me an answer as to whether you will agree to undertake it, in this case, and on what terms." "Very well, sir." The lawyer bowed deferentially, let his client out of the door, and, left alone, gave himself up to his joyful feeling. He felt so merry that, contrary to his rules, he gave the bargaining lady a lower price, and stopped catching moths, having decided finally that by next winter he would have to reupholster the furniture in velvet, as at Siganin's. If you enjoy this format, please leave a like and subscribe, and return tomorrow for the next chapter.